Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and board game aficionado. With this video, we're going to be taking a look at the starter set for Keyforge, Call of the Archons. With this video, you'll be able to determine if the starter set is worth getting. Let's take a look. Keyforge Call of the Archons just launched here in November. It is designed by Richard Garfield of Magic the Gathering fame, as well as other games like Netrunner and King of Tokyo. It is a semi-collectible card game. It's actually billed as a unique deck game. So the mechanic here for collection is you do not buy booster packs at all. You do not actually customize or build your decks at all. You buy instead just blind boxes of the decks themselves. And these decks are all supposedly balanced and competitive from the start. So it's still fun to be able to buy these blind box decks, but you don't have to have that booster pack and then throw away all the other cards that aren't going to be worth it. Instead, you've got a full deck ready to go. The starter box retails for $40, and it includes 2 of these random starter boxes in this box. So that is $20 right there. And the other, it gives you 2 other decks, the Radiant Argus, the Supreme deck, and the Miss Onyx Censorious deck, which are not randomized. They're the same in every single starter box, and they're full of mostly common cards designed to kind of teach players the game. And you might think, well, is that really worth having those 2 decks when they're not random? Everybody knows what they are, and they're kind of a lot of the easier cards. That's going to be up for you to determine. I think it is useful because, especially if you're going to be teaching a lot of people how to play Keyforge, it's very nice to have. But you do get these 2 random ones as well that we'll take a look at, and you also get some nice extra counters and tokens that we will look at as well. The manual, of course, you get the Fantasy Flight catalog booklet here. The manual is just this quick start guide. It's very, very brief and light, and the purpose here is because these kind of games, when new expansions come out, they'll add new mechanics and new traits and features, so it's kind of hard to have a printed rule book, but I would have at least liked to see Fantasy Flight make the effort to have a starter rulebook. Instead, you find the full rulebook online at keyforgegame.com, I believe. This one does get you started and teach you the basics of the game, especially if you're going to use the included, those 2 decks that are the same in every single starter deck. This will give you, and frankly, the game is, if you've played Magic, you know how to play this game, but it's actually easier. It's a lot easier than Magic, and that's not a disparaging comment. That's frankly a compliment. I think it uses a lot of like the Hearthstone way of just making things a little more streamlined and easier for everybody, but also making things more fun. Now, granted, this is also the first, very first wave of Keyforge, so further on down the road, they could certainly add more complexity, as these card games often do and get kind of blown out. But for now, this is the quick start guide, which does teach you the game, but the full rules are actually going to be online. So this is the tokens that you get, and this is honestly very, very nice to have because the game is not about killing your opponent. The game is about crafting these keys, and they're very cool looking. You need 6 amber to craft one of these keys. The game is called Keyforge, and 3 of these keys win you the game. And you can see here's all the little amber tokens that you get. I've obviously just opened this, so I haven't popped anything out. You also get the damage counters, which are nice to have. Now, obviously, all of these, you can just use whatever you want. You can use coins for amber. You can use, whatever other game you've got that's got little damage counters. Tiddlywinks, whatever you've got, you can use. So it's not super necessary, but it's nice to have because the printed icons on the cards themselves obviously look like the amber, and they look like this shape of damage. So that is a nice feature to have. Not necessary, but very nice if you're going to end up playing a lot of Keyforge. I have already opened this deck. Obviously, this comes wrapped up. You can see here are the included, I'm calling them blind boxes, but this is what you would get if you were just going to buy Keyforge as a booster display box. They would just have these very small boxes, and these retail for $10 a piece, and you get 2 of these included with the starter box. You also get a pretty nice little insert here, although very quickly you're probably going to have to nuke this insert in order to actually start, if you start buying a lot of these packs, you're probably going to have to take this out, and then you've got a box. But that is the plus of getting the Keyforge starter box is that you get a box of Keyforge, so you have a place to actually put all these decks that you're probably going to be acquiring. I'm going to put these aside for now because we're going to look at the ones that you get, which is these cards. You get a bunch of them that just give you +1 power. So if you have anything that increases a creature's power, you've got cards for that. Again, not necessary. You can use whatever you want to track that, but it's kind of cool to have these nifty cards for that. And same thing with stun. If a creature is stunned, you can also just apply a card to that. And they give you a pretty good amount of them too, which is nice to have. The chain tracker, this is something that's used to basically balance and handicap. It's kind of like a golf handicap, honestly. So that if any deck is perceived as being too strong or powerful in the meta, basically, then this kind of hampers your card drawing ability. So it's a very easy way of just handicapping a deck that might be too strong. Again, the game is supposed to be balanced with all the various decks, but it's really kind of impossible to do that. Even with just this first wave of cards, there's so many cards, there's so many combinations. Supposedly the algorithm is very, very good at it, but there is going to be situations where some decks are going to be really good, and especially some are going to be just better than others. And so this chain tracker helps you do that. If you determine that one deck is better, then you can use this to kind of handicap that player, and I think that's a really interesting feature to include. So that's the kind of extra cards and tokens you get. These are the set decks you get. You get Miss Onyx Censori, and by the way, the deck names are excellent. They're all kind of that Diablo loot or Borderlands guns, whatever you want at Destiny, where they do the randomized loot kind of thing. This is the same thing here, which is pretty funny. You get Miss Onyx Censorius, and what is the other? Radiant Argus something. Radiant Argus the Supreme. So with every deck, you get a nice checklist here, which tells you exactly what is in that deck. There are 7 total factions in Keyforge Call of the Archons. Each deck is going to be made up of 3 factions, and a big part of the game is that every turn, there's no mana system at all. Instead, you can only play one of 3 factions, so you really want to be able to coordinate and sync up and decide which ones you can play to get the most out of it. Now, rarity-wise, you can see that the plain circle, each one is a common. The diamonds are uncommon, and then from there it goes stars are rares, and then there's actually maverick cards, which can basically swap houses. So, obviously, the starter deck cards do not come with any rares, and in fact they are almost all commons with just, I think, 1 uncommon per faction. So you might be thinking, oh man, that sucks, it's not really worth it. Well, again, in Keyforge, it's the decks themselves that are actually going to be worth anything. Individual cards aren't worth much, so rarity is just more of like how often do these cards appear in these decks. So it's a lot more of a different system involved than just straight up like trying to go after rares all the time. And again, these starter deck cards are designed to help teach the game, and for that I think they are useful, unless you're really just going to jump right into the competitive scene. But if you've got friends and you're at all going to play casually and kind of teach the game, I do think these decks do quite well. We can actually take a look at which cards you actually get here in a second, so you can see what all is included in these 2 37 card decks. From the Miss Onyx Censorius deck, this is the Shadows faction. From the Miss Onyx Censorius deck, this is the Dees faction. And rounding out Miss Onyx Censorius is the Brobnar faction. For the second starter deck, Radiant Argus the Supreme, this is the Untamed faction. The second faction in Radiant Argus the Supreme is Sanctum. And the third and final faction in Radiant Argus the Supreme, the second starter box deck, is Logos. Alright, now it's the moment we've all been waiting for. I am going to open for the first time my blind decks that were included in my Keyforge starter box. I have not opened these. These are still sealed, and in fact, these are not tuck boxes at all, unfortunately. You kind of have to just break them apart in order to open and see what you've got. I wonder if it's easier to do that from the bottom. We're going to do that, but this is always the exciting fun time because I have no idea what's in here. Well, I know it's a deck of cards for sure. Okay, there's a QR code here, so I'm probably going to have to cover that up. So, what do we got? This is Whisper Stare of the Companion's Tunnel. That's a pretty great name. And it looks like this deck has three rares included, which I think that might be about normal. I think most decks have between, I want to say, 2 and 4 rares per deck. This is a Mars Sanctum Shadows deck, and it's got 2 rares in the Sanctum checklist, and no Mavericks that I can see. A lot of commons, obviously, and some undead. It looks like Sanctum is especially powerful. Now, I should preface this by I haven't really had a chance to play the game much at all, so I'm literally not sure what all these cards can do, as I am just now unboxing this completely. But this looks like a fairly interesting deck. I think the rares are definitely exciting to have. Mars seems like a very fun faction, but Sanctum looks like it has all the good cards here. Feel free to leave some comments on there on how you would play this deck, Whisper Stare of the Companion's Tunnel. And you can see there's the unique backing you've got with the factions and the actual Whisper Stare of the Companion's Tunnel on it. That's pretty great. I like that name a lot. Some of the names are quite strange, but that one seems pretty fun. So that is that. Whisper Stare of the Companion's Tunnel. This is the shadow cards that came in that deck. Here are the Sanctum cards that came with my Whisper Stare of the Companion's Tunnel. And here are the Mars cards. Round out the deck for Whisper Stare of the Companion's Tunnel. Alright, here's the second deck for my second blind deck for Keyforge Call of the Archons. And it is, what is it? Leah Pluto Hornpotamus. That's funny. Wow, did we really? Everyone, I have exciting news. We got 3 completely different factions in my 2 blind decks. Here's the first one. Whisper Stare, Mars, Shadows, and Sanctum, Brobnar, Logos, and Dis. That's pretty cool. The one thing I was definitely looking for was diversity in decks, which is cool. Hey! Master of 3. Very cool. Is that the Maverick card, I believe? And then we've got some, it looks like 3 rares. Overlord Grekking, Tireless Krokag, and the Collar of Subordination. This is the Leah Pluto Hornpotamus. Leah Hornpotamus goes by Pluto. I love these names. That's fantastic. There's the backing. It's a cool purple look to it. Very cool. Take a look at the cards. For my second blind box deck in the starter deck, which is called Leah Pluto Hornpotamus, this is the Logos faction. The Dis faction for Leah Pluto Hornpotamus is a little tricky to fit on here because I did not get a single duplicate card in this faction. All uniques. And same for the Brobnar faction. All unique cards to round out the third faction for Leah Pluto Hornpotamus. So is it worth getting Keyforge Call of the Archons starter box? I think so. If you're going to play this game, I think the starter box is worth it. You get those 2 blind boxes, which is $20 right there. So you're basically paying $20 for the pre-made decks that you know, which again, these are worth $10. They're not the most exciting decks because they're mostly common cards, but they are the more simpler cards, so they're easier to teach to people. I think they're still decently competitive. You know, rare doesn't necessarily mean better, just means kind of more complex and maybe has some more interesting combinations. But it doesn't necessarily mean that these decks are worse or better than other decks. So you still get 4 decks, which is $40. It's just that 2 of them are maybe a little less exciting than what you would normally get. Doesn't necessarily mean worse, though. I think they're good teaching tools. But you get, obviously, this nice box, and you get the extra cards for power, stun, and the chain trackers, and especially the tokens here, which fit very nicely with the game's art style and look. So I would definitely recommend the starter box. I would not pay more than $40 for it, however, because at that point, then it really becomes maybe not worth it so much. And the nice thing is you don't need the starter box to play the game. You can just buy, you can spend the $10 and just get one of these boxes and, either have another friend buy $10 or buy 2 of these packs for $20, and then you're good to go, and you can just use whatever you want to use for Amber and counters. Now, it's a little harder because the game does use a Hearthstone damage system where it's not all or nothing on damage. You do have to track damage on creatures, and, Amber is obviously a big thing. So you do need kind of more tokens and counters than you would normally for a physical card game. So this is nice to have, but again, it's not necessary. You could use whatever you wanted to and have a much, much less purchase price. And obviously now you can get, rules online. You don't need to have this for sure. I would recommend this eventually, but don't pay more than $40 for it. If you can only get this, and this was the last one at my friendly local game store they had, the last starter box, so I do think they are selling out, so I wouldn't freak out that much. If it's in stock, I would grab it if you're in Keyforge. If not, just go ahead and get these. Use the rules online, use whatever counters you have, and then eventually, if you end up really liking Keyforge, then you can take the plunge and go and get the starter deck, because I think it's still worth getting for all the extra bits and pieces. Thank you all for watching this video, and we'll see more about Keyforge in the future and see how it does.